One, two, one, two. Okay. All right. So this presentation is a bit different than the ones that we've just seen. I guess for me, the primary intent and intention is to try and contextualize a little bit what account abstraction as a concept is, and then also try to explain to you a little bit how SAFE is trying to tackle, the challenge to make account abstraction accessible and more widely used within the crypto space. So, if you don't know about SAFE, maybe you already introduced me, so I don't need to reintroduce myself. But if you don't know about SAFE, SAFE is kind of a core piece of infrastructure on most EVMs, as it supports primarily introduced as a multi-signature wallet. It's a smart contract wallet that has great adoption and it's used by many ecosystem players for a wide array of use cases. Given that it introduced this idea of a multi-signature actually at the genesis of Gnosis, correct? I think so. So yeah, my name is Clem and I work as a product manager there. You can follow me, Twitter, Telegram, send me a DM, anything. It's cool. We can talk. So a little agenda. I will first try to infuse in you a few key concepts behind what account abstraction is and means to me. I think there's a lot of interesting threads and a lot of interesting material online to learn about it. It's something that's been primarily pushed over the past year from the Ethereum Foundation as being, the area of focus that we should try and pay the most attention to. And then I will talk about SAFE and how SAFE kind of fits into this. And then I will also talk a little bit about the design constraints that we have if we want to operate in the space. And lastly, I will share with you some insights as to what are developer preferences for this whole account abstraction topic. So, key concepts. This is a pun. I hope some of you get it. Some of you familiar with key management. You all know that it's pretty painful to manage keys. The even concept of an EOA and MetaMask is very familiar for us, but many of us share relatively bad experiences with losing our keys or poorly managing them, getting them stolen one way or the other. So, in computer science, data abstraction is defined as a way to hide information to increase efficiency. And here in this little meme I created for the occasion, which I hope you enjoy, I try to explain a little bit how data abstraction happened at the most fundamental level in software development, even from the libraries that are in use. As a developer, as a software developer, you don't need to understand binary or to write binary to write programs, but instead we simplify that process by introducing JavaScript libraries. For end users, you can think of contextually relative to data abstraction as a topic and applied to decentralized system. Account abstraction to an extent is the idea of abstracting the complexity of key management for interacting with decentralized systems. Right? Think about a world in which we can talk to blockchains without having to manage our EOEs or our monosigners via an EOA, via MetaMask, and so on and so forth. But it's actually way more than just key management. So the status quo on Ethereum is pretty much as shown here. Courtesy to geeks4geeks.org for this little image that I thought was quite relevant and self-explanatory. In the Ethereum ecosystem and on most EVM chains, we have kind of a dual setup, right? We have our identities, which are dictated by so-called externally owned accounts. These are the keys that we use to constantly interact with the blockchain. So we connect to a dApp. We download MetaMask. We set up MetaMask. Once we set up MetaMask, we fund MetaMask. Once with MetaMask that's funded, then we have to sign, approve, and interact in different ways with those decentralized applications. So this is for the externally owned account part. I guess most of us would agree that where most of the value actually accrues on Ethereum is on the contract side of things. So a contract is pretty much similar to an EOA, except that it's extended by logic and storage. Logic by code and storage, right? So we can attach some particular functions and some functions to a contract that's also stored on the blockchain. Now, the idea for us, so talking about the EOA's limitations, I think again, MetaMask and EOS per se are quite limiting in terms of functionality, right? You're signing, you're storing a balance, everyone can see your balance, that's great. You have this public-private key pair that allows you to authenticate yourself and perform those basic actions. However, there's no logic attached to it, right? Like you can't do much with this public-private key pair that you hold. Then on the security front, it's also a nightmare. Like a lot of people have lost their keys and have lost, enormous amount of funds, etc., due to poor key management, because it introduces as well this idea which we see as valuable of self-custody, but self-custody is also very risky. And then, I wrote this here, like pre-historical UX, right? Like we cannot compete with current Web2 services. There's no way we can, if you compare an experience you're having today on a Google service versus the one that you're having currently in the Web3 world, well, they are complete opposite. And that is primarily due to the fact that we are talking to the blockchain using EOS constantly. So, account abstraction. Account abstraction is the idea to unify EOAs with smart contracts, okay? The idea that EOAs should no longer be, but that the single and the main entry points that we should have for when we talk to blockchains are smart contract accounts themselves. Your identity and everything that comes with it, your logic, your rules, can all be stored in a smart contract rather than an EOA. Now, we can think now maybe what kind of use cases does it open? And yes, this one I think is a funny meme that was posted by Tobias yesterday. Thanks to him. What about Safe in all this? Is Safe account abstraction? Well, yes, it has always been, because Safe is a smart contract account. And probably one of the most standardized across, most EVM chains. As written here, the EOA primarily this, single, dual interaction that you're having with it. Sorry, authenticating, signing, having your balance stored. Safe is controlled by code, so that means that it holds its own custom logic, and it can be extended via this custom logic also, which makes it, incredibly powerful. So this is a slide from Lucas, which I very much like. At the very top, we have the multisig of Safe, which is, our basic design and our main, I think, like our first kind of market fit in this market. In case you're not familiar and you're working on a Web3 project and you need to manage a treasury, or you need to do something among those lines, please use the multisig. It's a very good way to have to write down your own rules for funds management on chain without having a single point of failure and a single EOA, managing your liquidity or your reserve. But so now, if we think about the Safe contract and the fact that there's multiple EOAs that connect to it and that provides different levels of access control based on how you configure it, well, say the Safe as a contract can unlock any kind of use case. If we can think big, as in like spending policies, scheduled transactions, roles permissions, recovery mechanisms, hierarchies, transaction batching, gas abstraction, fraud monitoring, and so on and so forth. This might all sound interesting to you. However, given that we're currently looking into this, we also need to be mindful of constraints and design constraints for this SDK. To give you a bit of context, we plan on working on an SDK that is going to be looking at enabling AA-enabled account abstraction enabled features. So think about keyless interaction with decentralized systems, maybe as a primer, and then gasless transactions, so that you don't have to think about how you're paying for a particular interaction with the blockchain. And so we plan on releasing a POC probably by the end of February, and then pushing something into production also the coming quarter or the following quarter. to tackle these kind of challenges that the industry faces. From a design constraint standpoint, there are, of course, constraints that we need to work with. One of them is that currently there is not a single, standalone standard that allows for this to happen at a protocol level. So what I'm talking about here and about introducing account abstraction at a smart contract level really sits on top of the protocol level. That means that natively, Ethereum currently does not offer smart contracts as the default entry point into its chain. There's been a lot of efforts, though, happening, and several attempts to try and standardize account abstraction. Currently, I think ZK Sync and Starknet are doing a really good job, and there's also the community around EIP 4337, which is doing a lot of effort, pushing a lot of effort to try and decentralize a so-called relaying function, which allows to have sponsored and meta transactions and execute them in a decentralized fashion. So that's quite interesting. And then, as we are thinking of designing this SDK, we're also facing other kind of challenges, right? Like if we're positioning the safe contract as the core piece of infrastructure to enable account abstraction, then we need to think, okay, what kind of services do we want to plug into the contract, right? Do we want them to be custodial services, non-custodial services? Then we also have issues with the compatibility with existing apps. EIP 1271 is another improvement proposal that's aiming at tackling the whole signing complexities that come with using a smart contract rather than an EOA. Gas management is another problem. Centralized versus decentralized services. Go-to-market is also a big one, because that may be, on this one, maybe I would like to extend a little bit my thought here, but the go-to-market, I think, is very important for us to make the most out of this account abstraction narrative, because right now, even if as an industry and a lot among Ethereum believers and enthusiasts, we think in this idea of account abstraction, we also need to think of what kind of use cases do we want to enable to onboard those next billion users, right? Like, is DeFi going to be enough as a use case for us to actually onboard more users, right? Once we abstract the complexity, great. What kind of value can we create then for users? So that's, like, for me, one of the main also questions here. And then lastly, security and privacy, right? If you position the safe contract as this kind of aggregator of different services, what kind of security challenges does it introduce, and what should be the security standards for the integrations that we provide? And privacy. I think I have a friend of mine who's very interested in privacy in the audience, so I wrote this here to avoid his questions later on, because it's a complicated topic. Safe's approach, no more me, that's the meme, no more me, but instead focusing on the build and focusing on delivering an SDK that can make those use cases and those interactions, seamless and simple. As I said already, we want to use the safe contract as a core infrastructure piece, probably in the form of like a monorepo with different integration as packages. We already are working, and we've been working with Gelato, who's a popular relayer that allows gasless sponsored multi-chain transactions, meaning you can talk to different blockchains without having to manage, the assets stored in your EOA, or you don't have to pay for gas. And then also another principle in this design is to be user-centric. I think we all understand the value of not having any vendor lock-in. So we want to enable and we want to provide modularity for developers, meaning no single service provider should be the only option available for developers, but instead we should offer many. And then flexibility for users, right? This one is key. I'm talking to you. Some of you are, Web3 veterans, if I may say. Well, you of course want to preserve maybe the current self-custodial setup that you have. But some others might not want that. So we need to guarantee that within the spectrum of custodial versus non-custodial, we can offer all these options in the user flows that will be enabled through this SDK. And then, yes, some dates, timelines. Lastly, to share some insights with you, if you're interested in the concept of account abstraction, I did this stacking cards survey and user research with a series of Web3 builders or some Web3 builders to try and classify in order of importance the different themes that we can enable. And this was the outcome of this research. So it looks like the idea of gasless transactions is for the Ethereum ecosystem is probably ranking the highest. But then we have other topics that are quite interesting, including account recovery, because now with smart contract wallets, we can actually do that. If you lose your keys, there should be a way for you to get them back, whether that's in a decentralized fashion or not. But we can work on solutions looking into this. Spending policies, custom signing schemes, which is also quite interesting. Think about using the trusted execution environment in your smartphone, for instance, or using Face ID on your mobile to approve a transaction, but only through that scheme you can maybe approve a particular type of transaction. Session keys for gamers, that's something that's talked a lot about. Imagine connecting to an application and then having some kind of an allowance that allows you to perform many transactions without having to sign individually each one of them. And then, yeah, subscription, Web2 logins, on-off ramp, self-deployment of contracts. Just it's limitless. So, yeah, I think personally, I'm a true believer that within a short amount of time we should be able to provide Web2-like user experience on the backend, on the decentralized infrastructure running in the backend. We will put great effort to do this with care. And I would love to connect with you if you're interested in the topic, or if you want to collaborate, you want to learn more, just hit me up, and I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Clem. Any questions from the audience? Yeah?
Yeah, I just want to know what's going to be included in the proof of concept out of, I don't know, maybe the list of features that you said were developer preferences?
Yeah. That's still in the making, but so if we go back to this, we will have the sponsored and meta transaction as well as the counterfactual, it's called counterfactual deployment of safe, meaning that you should be able to derive a safe address from an EOA without deploying the contract yourself, or to deploy it within a first transaction that you initiate on the blockchain. The sponsored and meta transaction use case also falls behind the umbrella term of relaying. And relaying is the idea of relaying transaction to the blockchain to abstract, for instance, the native token that it requires or the gas that it requires to be processed. So this is probably one of the core piece of this puzzle, which is really about managing and facilitating how users interact with the blockchain without having to do this whole asset management themselves, and that will be provided in the POC. There's also potentially an integration with Web3 Auth and some other integrations that we are looking at. But I think we aim to have something for builders to work with at ETH Denver. We will put a series of bounties as well, with maybe some ideas of cool user stories to look into. My perspective also, and my opinion on the topic is that the work of designers here is going to be key. We should work as closely as we can with UX and UI designers if we want to make any of that a reality. So I expect and I hope that the ecosystem focuses on more offers more design-focused hackathons, just to be able to show that we can literally reproduce the Web2 experiences running on a decentralized architecture.
Oh, there's one. Then?
About 8.8 session keys. Do you plan to include it in your SDK as well?
Yeah. So So all these features, right, further down the line. I would love to, we're thinking of maybe having this SDK as an aggregator of service providers that plug into it and that make those use cases possible. The question around the timeline, though, I can't tell you which one we'll prioritize, because although this is developer preferences, we also need to consider the other end of the spectrum, which are user preferences. And so for that, we need to do research to validate what kind of immediate value we can create for end users. And so based on that, that ranking is not, this is not a roadmap. This is just developer preferences. But Yeah, there's already Zodiac that created this allowance module. If you are familiar with the safe stack, yeah. So the allowance module of Zodiac maybe is already a good step toward that direction.
Like a temporary key or what?
Yeah, it's a key that you like. Yeah, temporary key is a way to tackle one way to tackle the session keys feature or theme.
Which of those features do you think is the most important for, let's say, Web 2-like experience, or like getting Web 2 users using Web 3?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Although Web 2 logins and on-off ramp rank slow, I think we need to maybe conceptualize those user flows in terms of proper conversion and try to see how do we define conversion in the traditional Web 2 space. If you are running a marketplace and you're selling items, probably the conversion for you is when people, take their credit card and they end up making a payment. Well, I think an interesting use case we could explore, and maybe for this POC, would be the deployment of an EOA based on a card payment. So you could imagine a flow like this one. You're making a purchase online, you're putting out your credit card, you're already authenticated in some way. That transaction is not just gonna allow you to purchase that item that you want, but instead you can attach to that the creation of an EOA, which itself will deploy a safe contract, which can store any kind of digital asset. So what we can do is we can already try and think of go-to-markets that piggyback of classic user Web 2 user flows to try and basically provide Web 2 native users smart contract accounts without having to do anything else than typical credit card payments. Yeah, that for me would be a good idea.
If I deploy a one-of-one safe today and I sign a transaction but don't execute it, is anyone able to execute it, or only the EOA that's a signer on that safe? Because like in that case, you already kind of have sponsored transactions, right?
Like you're talking about you're signing a meta transaction, and so in theory, yes, if you have all the meta transactions collected from all the required owners, that's possible. Okay. Yeah. It's not how the UI works, but yeah.
Do you have like what chains you're launching the proof of concept on first?
I have a preference for Gnosis chain. No, Gnosis chain, I think as like hard requirement, we're thinking of Gnosis chain, Ethereum, and Polygon. There's interesting things as well to do with Polygon, particularly because of their market penetration with legacy Web 2 brands. So that's my thinking about it. But then, as we already on the relaying part with Gelato, it could be that we're going to be available on many different chains. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your time. And yeah, thanks everyone for the silence.